America, pay attention. Something just broke in California, and it isn't just a political scandal. It's a warning, and the shockwave is only just beginning to reach the rest of the country. $24 billion in taxpayer dollars meant to fight homelessness. Gone. And federal agents have moved in. The FBI, the IRS, HUD's Inspector General. They are tracing the money, and every trail leads straight toward the Governor Gavin Newsom's inner circle. Trillions of promises, decades of leadership, and billions of your hard-earned money funneled through a system so opaque, so mismanaged, that federal investigators are now asking the questions Sacramento refused to answer. 187,000 Californians sleep on the streets. Families, veterans, children, human lives caught in a web of broken promises, inflated costs, and political cronyism. And while the people suffer, billions flow to consultants, contractors, and allies with influence, not to the vulnerable they were meant to serve. This is bigger than one governor, bigger than one state. It is a test of American values, a question every citizen must face. When leaders fail, who stands up? When oversight disappears, who protects the taxpayer? When ambition and political loyalty outweigh accountability, who defends justice? Because history shows us, democracy only works when citizens demand it works. And right now, California is sending a message to the entire nation. This isn't just news. This is a call to vigilance, a call to action, a call to reclaim accountability in a government that must serve its people, not the powerful. And the time to listen, watch, and act is now. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay to the end. Because the outcome of this story could help decide the next election and maybe even the future of the American experiment itself. Before the scandal even broke, the truth was already visible on the streets. California is home to 187,000 homeless residents, nearly a third of the entire nation's homeless population. More than half of every unsheltered American now sleeps on California sidewalks, in tent cities, under overpasses, or in sprawling encampments that stretch for blocks. And here's the part no one in Sacramento wants to say out loud. California spends more money on homelessness than any state in American history. And the crisis isn't shrinking. It isn't stabilizing. It isn't even holding steady. It is exploding. Since 2013, homelessness in California has surged 53%. Every year, more tax dollars, more programs, more announcements, more commissions, more task forces. And yet every morning, Californians wake up to more tents, more needles, more human suffering, and more neighborhoods collapsing under the weight of government failure. And through it all, Gavin Newsom has stood at podium after podium, repeating the same polished lines. As mayor of San Francisco, he said, "We can solve homelessness." As lieutenant governor, he said, "We will solve homelessness." As governor, he said, "We're making historic investments. We're building a system that delivers real results." The rhetoric was flawless. The promises were sweeping. And the money, billions of taxpayer dollars, poured in year after year. But the results, not progress, not reform, not hope, a catastrophe of historic proportions. Because while the governor promised solutions, the crisis spread. While the administration demanded more funding, the outcomes grew worse. And while Californians sacrificed more of their paychecks to fuel these programs, Sacramento quietly stopped tracking how billions were being spent. This is not just mismanagement. This is not just incompetence. This is a betrayal of every Californian who believed the promises, and every American watching a state with boundless resources spiral into chaos under leaders who refuse to answer for it. And that is where the story turns, because once federal investigators stepped in, everything changed. In early 2024, the truth finally broke through the political fog, and it hit Sacramento like a shockwave. The California State Auditor released a report that stunned lawmakers, watchdog groups, and federal agencies across the country. Between 2018 and 2023, California spent $24 billion on homelessness programs, not million, billion. And yet, after 2021, the state simply stopped tracking what happened to the money. No metrics, no outcome reports, no performance reviews, no paper trail. The very agency responsible for coordinating the effort the California Interagency Council on Homelessness quietly shut down the most basic forms of oversight. They stopped collecting data on where funds were going. They stopped documenting how those funds were used. And they stopped reporting whether billions in spending had any measurable effect on homelessness at all. The auditor's conclusion was devastating in its simplicity. California could not prove any improvement despite spending $24 billion. The money went somewhere, but the state cannot show where. For a government of California's size, this is not a clerical error. This is not a missing spreadsheet. This is a systemic collapse of accountability at the highest levels. And in Washington, that revelation set off alarms. Because when billions in taxpayer dollars disappear into a black hole of vanished paperwork, missing oversight, and political silence, that's not just a state problem. That's a federal problem. That's a national security level failure in financial governance. And the agencies that monitor waste, fraud, and abuse knew exactly what they were looking at. Something bigger, something coordinated, something no one in Sacramento wanted the public to see. And that's when the federal government made its move. While California's records were blank, federal investigators began piecing the story together. And what they uncovered was shocking. In Los Angeles, the cost of a single homeless housing unit exceeded $800,000. Let that sink in. Not a family home, not a duplex, not even a modest 2-bedroom apartment. A studio unit, one tiny space for a single individual. To put it in perspective, $800,000 could buy a full-size, comfortable home in countless parts of America. In LA, it bought a single studio apartment. One person, one tiny unit. And yet, even with this staggering price tag, homelessness did not shrink. It continued to rise. The streets remained crowded with tents and encampments. The system had failed, spectacularly. Voters had been promised change. Proposition HHH promised 10,000 new units of affordable housing. 5 years later, fewer than 2,000 were delivered. The cost per unit didn't just rise, it exploded from an initial estimate of $375,000 to nearly $600,000, with some projects reaching $837,000 per unit. The numbers didn't add up. The promises didn't match the results. And federal investigators were asking the questions Sacramento refused to answer. Where did the money go? Why did costs skyrocket? Who profited while the crisis worsened? Because in California, the story wasn't just about inefficiency. It was about billions of taxpayer dollars vanishing into a system that had become a black hole of waste, mismanagement, and corruption. And the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't an accident. It was a crisis engineered by neglect, oversight, failures, and political convenience. As federal investigators dug deeper, a disturbing truth emerged. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was exploitation. One of the most shocking examples came from former Los Angeles City Councilman Jose Huizar, now serving a 13-year federal sentence. FBI agents uncovered $200,000 in cash hidden inside a blue label Johnny Walker whiskey box. That was just a fraction of the more than $1.5 million in bribes Huizar had accepted from real estate developers. And it wasn't just cash. Investigators documented casino chips, private jet flights, luxury hotel stays, and escorts, all in exchange for using his office to push developers' projects through city approvals. But Huizar wasn't alone. Former LA Deputy Mayor Raymond Chan received 12 years in prison for conspiracy, wire fraud, and bribery. He too had exploited his position to enrich himself and political allies, using homelessness funding as a vehicle for personal gain. Across California, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Money flowed from the state to counties, to cities, to nonprofits, to contractors. And somewhere along that chain, billions disappeared. Consultants were paid. Developers were rewarded. Political allies received grants. But the people these programs were designed to help, they stayed on the streets. California had built a homelessness industrial complex, a system where everyone gets paid, except the homeless themselves. And as investigators continue to follow the money, the question looms larger than ever. Who is really accountable when billions vanish and no one is watching? In April 2024, the federal government stepped in and the stakes just got real. The newly appointed U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California launched the Homelessness, Fraud, and Public Corruption Task Force. This wasn't just an investigation. It was a full-scale federal response, bringing together the FBI, the IRS, Criminal Investigation Division, and the HUD Inspector General. Their mission was clear: follow the money, uncover the fraud, and hold those responsible accountable. And what they found in Los Angeles, the epicenter of California's spending, was staggering. No basic financial controls, no vetting mechanisms, no performance evaluations, no tracking of taxpayer dollars. For any federal compliance officer, this isn't just negligence, it's criminal. Within months, the Department of Justice began filing charges against developers and contractors who had exploited the system. And the message from federal agents was unmistakable. We are prepared to pursue cases at the highest levels of government if evidence supports it. Those words didn't just rattle Los Angeles, they sent shockwaves through Sacramento. For the first time, the billion-dollar homelessness machine was under a spotlight it couldn't escape. And at the top of that machine sat the people who had promised oversight, promised accountability, and failed spectacularly. The question now hanging over California was simple but terrifying. If federal agents are willing to go after developers, who in Sacramento will be next? Federal investigators are now zeroing in on Governor Gavin Newsom. And for the first time, the question isn't about lost programs or mismanaged funds. It's about leadership at the very top. How does a state lose track of $24 billion under the watch of its governor? How do billions vanish while oversight is repeatedly blocked and no one is held accountable? The answers point to three critical issues. Issue 1. Criminal negligence. Newsom repeatedly appointed officials who were either unqualified or willfully negligent, leaving billions of taxpayer dollars exposed. Take Gustavo Velasquez, for example. In 2020, Newsom placed him in charge of the Department of Housing and Community Development and the $4 billion Home Key program. Under Velasquez, financial documents went unchecked, grants were approved using fraudulent paperwork. Tens of millions flowed to developers with fake bank statements. Basic audits were ignored. Federal investigators described these failures as crude fraud, errors so obvious that any competent official should have caught them immediately. The reason it succeeded: oversight didn't exist. And oversight didn't exist because the state's leadership allowed it. Issue 2. Obstruction of transparency. Newsom didn't just allow oversight to fail, he actively blocked it. He personally vetoed bipartisan legislation that would have shined a light on California's spending. The key target, Assembly Bill 2903, which would have required tracking homelessness spending systematically, clear, measurable program outcomes, auditable financial reports, identification of waste and fraud. The bill had broad support. Oversight groups demanded it. Taxpayer advocates begged for it. Newsom killed it. By vetoing AB 2903, he guaranteed that billions could continue to flow without accountability. That veto is now a central focus in the federal probe. Issue 3. Political cronyism. The $4 billion Home Key program became a playground for politically connected developers. Federal investigators have already identified dozens of multi-million-dollar grants awarded to firms with close ties to California's Democratic networks. This wasn't a competitive process, it was a political one. Even the Los Angeles mayor's office under Mayor Karen Bass appears in early investigative threads linked to these developers and their approvals. No charges have been filed against Newsom or Bass yet. But the paper trail is growing and federal investigators are following it. The picture is clear: billions lost, oversight blocked, political connections exploited, and at the center of it all, Governor Gavin Newsom. The next question now gripping investigators and the public is simple. How deep does this go? As investigators dig into California and look at Minnesota too, a clear pattern emerges. When massive taxpayer dollars flow through complex, opaque systems, corruption isn't a bug, it's inevitable. This isn't just a California problem. It's a structural issue in states and cities where governance funnels billions through public-private partnerships, nonprofit networks, developer consortiums, consulting firms, and county bureaucracies. Here's the result. Money moves at massive scale. Every intermediary collects a paycheck. No one checks if the programs actually work. When everyone profits regardless of results, the system stops caring about outcomes. Homelessness becomes an industry. Failure becomes profitable. And the taxpayer, they pay the price. Billions vanish. Programs falter. Streets stay crowded. People remain unhoused. It's a system engineered to look like action while delivering nothing, but ensuring that political allies, contractors, and developers always come out ahead. And while the headlines focus on governors or city councils, the deeper story is this. The architecture of the system itself incentivizes waste, fraud, and indifference. The question now is simple, but terrifying. If the system rewards failure and punishes accountability, who will step in to fix it before the next $24 billion disappears? For years, Gavin Newsom has crafted an image of inevitability, poised to be California's first-term governor turned future presidential contender. A 2028 run has long been whispered in political circles as his next step. But the federal investigation threatens to unravel that carefully constructed narrative. If the FBI, IRS, or HUD Inspector General uncovers evidence of gross negligence, obstruction of transparency, misuse of billions in taxpayer funds, political favoritism benefiting allies and donors, fraudulent or complicit behavior, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a political earthquake, the kind of crisis that shatters national ambitions before they even take flight. Newsom's brand of progressive governance, built on promises of competence, compassion, and fiscal responsibility, is now under siege. The political machine he has cultivated in Sacramento, donors, allies, and bureaucratic networks, is teetering on collapse. The foundations of his authority are crumbling while investigators follow the money, the appointments, and the vetoes that allowed billions to disappear. And for a governor who has long sold himself as the face of competent modern leadership, the optics are catastrophic. Millions of Californians left unhoused while the state loses billions and the top office looks powerless, or worse, complicit. At this moment, Newsom faces a stark reality. The higher the ambition, the harder the fall. Sacramento's corruption scandal isn't just a local story, it's a national warning. This scandal isn't just a local crisis, it's a national story with consequences that could ripple all the way to the White House. Gavin Newsom has long presented himself as a visionary leader, the progressive face of California success, but billions lost, homelessness exploding, and federal investigators circling erode that image in ways no campaign ad can repair. If wrongdoing or even gross mismanagement is proven, it could derail Newsom's 2028 ambitions before they officially begin. Shift California politics, opening space for challengers in both parties who promise accountability. Trigger reforms in how massive programs are run with increased oversight and transparency demands. Inspire national debates over governance, corruption, and the role of state leadership in large-scale social programs. California has long been a model for progressive policy, but the unfolding investigation reveals a cautionary tale. When oversight is weak and political loyalty outweighs accountability, even the wealthiest, most ambitious state can spiral into systemic failure. For voters, taxpayers, and the country at large, this moment raises a crucial question. Can a state with billions at stake and a governor at the helm truly self-correct? Or will federal scrutiny be the only force that forces accountability? In short, what happens in Sacramento over the next months could reshape not just California, but the trajectory of national politics, and determine whether Gavin Newsom remains a contender or becomes a cautionary example of ambition undone by mismanagement. Behind the staggering numbers, $24 billion lost, thousands of units unbuilt, are real people whose lives are shaped by the failure of California's system. California is home to 187,000 homeless residents, nearly a third of the nation's total. People are sleeping on sidewalks, underpasses, and encampments, facing daily dangers from violence, disease, and exposure. For many, the promises of government programs never materialized, leaving them trapped in cycles of instability. This is more than mismanagement. History shows us that when governments prioritize political expediency over accountability, social crises deepen. Consider New York City in the 1970s, where mismanagement and corruption in public housing contributed to urban decline and widespread homelessness. Washington, D.C. in the 1980s, where misallocation of federal funds in welfare programs created long-term inequities and eroded public trust. California now stands at a similar crossroads, but on an even larger scale. The difference is that modern media, federal oversight, and political polarization magnify every failure, turning what once might have been a contained scandal into a national political flashpoint. Politically, the stakes for Gavin Newsom could not be higher. Federal investigators aren't just looking at administrative errors. They are scrutinizing appointments and vetting of key officials, repeated vetoes of transparency and accountability measures, patterns of favoritism that enriched political allies while programs failed. If any of these lines of inquiry produce evidence of wrongdoing, the consequences are historic. California voters may face the largest question of executive accountability in a generation. And nationally, the implications are clear. A governor's scandal can redefine the trajectory of presidential ambitions, party narratives, and voter confidence. In essence, the human cost of the homelessness crisis is inseparable from the political cost. Every studio apartment costing $800,000, every billions lost headline, and every vetoed oversight bill represents not just failure, it's a breach of public trust. And as history repeatedly teaches, when public trust erodes in large, powerful states, the fallout is not confined to city halls. It shapes elections, influences national discourse, and can determine which leaders rise and which fall from power. California is no longer just a laboratory for progressive policy. It has become a test case for whether ambition, wealth, and political influence can exist without accountability, and whether the people ultimately hold their leaders responsible. This story is not just about California. It's about how power, ambition, and money intersect with accountability, or the lack of it, in our democracy. Leadership matters. When those at the top fail to oversee billions in taxpayer dollars, the cost isn't abstract. It's measured in lives on the streets, neighborhoods under strain, and faith in government eroded. Transparency is not optional. Without auditable records, oversight, or enforcement, corruption isn't a possibility. It's inevitable. History is clear. Governments that prioritize loyalty and expediency over accountability invite failure. Failure has a human cost. Behind every dollar unaccounted for, behind every vetoed oversight bill, are real people, families, veterans, children, whose lives are shaped by neglect, mismanagement, and political gamesmanship. Corruption is contagious. When billions flow through opaque systems with political favoritism built in, failure becomes profitable and the public becomes the victim. And make no mistake, this isn't just California's crisis. It's a warning to every state, every city, and every American taxpayer. The system that allowed billions to vanish could exist anywhere if we allow it. As citizens, voters, and patriots, we have a choice. We can accept complacency and let corruption and mismanagement become the norm, or we can demand accountability, transparency, and integrity at every level of government. Watch closely. Follow the investigations. Know where your tax dollars go. Hold leaders responsible. Oversight isn't a suggestion. It's the foundation of democracy. Raise your voice. Speak for those whose voices are silenced by bureaucracy and corruption. Vote with consequence. Reward leadership that demonstrates competence, courage, and accountability, and reject leaders who prioritize political networks over public service. Because in the end, this isn't just about homelessness. It's about the character of our government, the trust we place in leaders, and the future of our republic. If billions can disappear in California and thousands suffer while the powerful prosper, the warning is clear. No state, no government, no democracy is immune if citizens fail to act. This is a moment for all Americans to remember. Accountability isn't optional. Justice isn't elective. And our country's values demand that leaders answer for every dollar, every promise, and every life affected by their choices. If you think this story ends with headlines, think again. What's happening in California isn't isolated. It's a warning for every state, every taxpayer, and every citizen who believes government should work for the people. The investigation is ongoing, the billions still unaccounted for. The questions about leadership, accountability, and justice are only getting louder. If you want to understand how this crisis could reshape national politics, what it means for future elections, and how ordinary Americans can demand real accountability, you need to stay informed. Click to watch the full breakdown, follow the money, and see the system exposed for what it really is. History is being written right now, and you have a front row seat. Your country, your tax dollars, your responsibility. Don't turn away.